Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you all for a great day yesterday. We're ready to get started with day 2 of the Ideas Summit, and excited to have another packed agenda with a lot of great speakers for you to hear from and great discussions. Day 2 packed in here this morning before lunchtime. We are excited to start this morning with one of our hosts here in Atlanta, Georgia, State Senator Jason Estevez. Representing Atlanta, Senator Estevez is serving his second term, focusing on tackling issues that impact Georgia families, especially public education, healthcare, housing, and economic opportunity. And just a couple of weeks ago, as you may have seen, he announced that he is running to be the next governor of Georgia. In reporting on his announcement, he has been noted as a steadfast supporter of abortion rights and Medicaid expansion, as well as a go-to expert in his chamber on education issues. After working as a teacher, Senator Estevez became the first Latino elected to a school board in Georgia, focused his efforts on promoting equity and improving the financial outlook of the Atlanta school system, and became chair of the board. Under his leadership, the school system attained its highest graduation rate to date, provided over $100 million in staff pay increases and stipends, and increased the district's fund balance to the highest levels while providing more money directly to school sites. So please join me in welcoming Senator Jason Estevez.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be with all of my fellow New Deal leaders. Look, welcome to Atlanta. I know you've been here for a couple days. My friends and colleagues in the room, whether it's Representative Sam Park and Senator Elena Perrin and Scott Holcomb and others, we huddled before y'all got here to make sure that you had the best weather that we could ever offer. So you are welcome. My name is Jason Estevez, and I'm running to be Georgia's next governor. And I recently made that excitement and have been locked away in a room, in a closet, doing call time all day. So I was recently asked, how's it been? And I'm like, oh, it's been fun. But look, it's also given me an opportunity to introduce myself to Georgians all across this state and have conversations about the challenges that we face as a state and as a country. And in fact, just recently, I was interviewed by the AJC, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and they asked me, they were like, what kind of Democrat are you? Are you a moderate? Are you progressive? Like, where do you fall? And I said, I'm a get stuff done for people Democrat. Where does that fall? Because that's what people are looking for. I'm someone who's from Columbus, Georgia, which is along the Georgia-Alabama line in southwest Georgia, raised by two parents who didn't go to college, each working 2 to 3 jobs just to make ends meet. They taught me the value of hard work and giving back to my community. And it's those values that I took with me to the classroom, where I taught middle school social studies to 150 kids. And these kids were no different than anyone in this room. They were just as smart. They had the same kinds of dreams. They were willing to work just as hard. But because of where they lived, they did not have the same kinds of opportunities. And I found that to be fundamentally wrong, because I believe that everyone deserves a fair shot. So since that time in the classroom, I've worked hard, whether it's as a lawyer, whether it's as a small business owner, whether it's as a state senator, whether it's as chair of the school board here in Atlanta, to give hardworking families a fair shot. Those families don't care what kind of Democrat we are. They just want us to get stuff done. And that's part of the issue that we have moving forward. We need to talk to people about what Democrats have to offer. What's our vision for the future? And how we're going to get the job done for them and their families. I've focused my campaign on kitchen table issues, particularly around the economy, because at the end of the day, what people want is to make sure that they're safe, that their families have more opportunities than what they had, and that they can live out their American dream. And for too many, they're working harder than they've ever worked and still struggling. So it's on all of us, whether you're on the school board, city council, state legislature, or in statewide office, to make sure that we're not only talking about the issues that they want to listen and hear about, but that we're actually getting stuff done. So I'm proud this morning to introduce someone who will, and I was not supposed to do this, if you could tell, who will help unpack and talk about the challenge that we have facing us, not only in Georgia, but across the country. Someone who has studied the shifts and trends that we're seeing, where it's weird. People really hate Donald Trump, but they really don't like us either. So we need to figure out how to tread that line and make sure that people understand what we're about and how we could rebuild a durable Democratic coalition. And Jim Kessler can do that. He's the co-founder and executive vice president for policy at Third Way, and he's been sounding the alarm about the disconnect that we have between our values and our voters. And he's here to talk us through how we can turn that disconnect into an opportunity. So it's something that I will be paying close attention to, Jim. Let's welcome him to the stage.
Good luck in your race. Everybody in a good mood this morning? We'll see how long that lasts. Okay. So, and I just, for the folks doing the audio back there, I'm not seeing anything on the screen here, if you could get that screen going. So this presentation is called Exposed. And it's because I believe the 2024 election exposed a series of vulnerabilities that Democrats have had that we've been able to avoid because we've either been winning some elections or losing by a close margin, but I think in 2024, I think the fantasy is now over. So I want to start with this map. And what you're seeing here is these are the top 20 states by educational attainment. These are the 20 states that have the highest per capita percentage of folks that hold a college degree or better. And Kamala Harris won 18 of those 20 states. We are plus 95 in the House, and we have a 34-4 advantage in the Senate. It doesn't add up to 40 because one of those states is DC, and we're not yet a state. And we should feel very, very good about that performance. And then here are the other 31 states. These are the 31 states that, by comparison, have lower levels of college degree attainment. And Harris won 2 of those states. We're minus 100 in the House, and it's 13-49 in the Senate. And what this map exposes is that outside of areas that are really outliers in college degree attainment, Democrats are not competitive at all on the national level or congressional level. Likewise, there are 19 states that touch either the Pacific or Atlantic Ocean. Harris won 14 of those states. There are 32 that do not. Harris won 6. 2 of those states are Vermont and DC, which again is not a state. That is the worst performance of any Democrat running for president since Mike Dukakis in 1988. And then, so if you put all of those maps together, you can see that it exposes that charge that Democrats are a culturally elite, coastal, overeducated, look down our noses, snooty party. You can see where the charge could ring true, okay? And then the last thing that it exposed is we had a formula, essentially a coalition that more or less worked for us throughout this century that is now, it's exhausted, like it no longer works. And it was win college-educated voters, and then win 90% plus of African Americans, and then close to 2/3 of Latinos and Asians. And theoretically, that formula still works, but we're not hitting those targets. So we hit the target with college-educated whites, but we fell short, and significantly short, with African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. And there are indications that diminishing numbers that we're getting with non-whites, I don't want to use the word permanent, but that it could become permanent unless we make some changes. And I'm going to start with this. So what you're looking at here is you're looking at college versus non-college, white men and women, and the percentage who voted for Kamala Harris. So if you look at that top row, white men, 47% of white men with a college degree voted for Harris, 30% of white men without a college degree voted for Harris, and you see there's that gap, 17-point gap between college and non-college, and you see the gap there also with women, it's 19 points. That college, non-college gap with whites has really been a long-standing issue for Democrats. Off and on, like we've had that gap really since the Vietnam War. Now, if you look at non-whites, okay, on the one hand, you can say like, well, the gap is a lot smaller, that's good news. Here's the bad news. This gap is brand new. It did not exist before this election, okay? So, if this non-college college virus that has infected Democrats among whites for the last 50 years is now spreading into non-whites, we're sunk, okay? And the reason we're sunk is because, particularly among Latinos and African Americans, the vast majority of those voters are non-college educated. Only 1 in 5 Latinos has a college degree. Just over 1 in 4 African Americans has a college degree. So if we are underperforming with non-college educated non-whites, particularly Latinos and African Americans, we are underperforming with Latinos and African Americans. So that means like that disconnect we really have to solve. So now I'm going to move from looking at the voter data to looking at the disconnect, college, non-college, professional, working class disconnect on culture issues and then economic issues. So let's start with culture. And here I'm looking at 3 groups that are essential to the Democratic coalition: Latinos, African Americans, and white progressives. And we're looking at culture issues, and there are 3 ways in which white progressives are an outlier compared to these groups and really any other group within the Democratic coalition. One is white progressives are just, they're paid attention to more than any other group. They're louder, they're better on social media, they're better in traditional media. So their views are really, a lot of times, imprinted on the Democratic brand. So that's one way that they're an outlier. Number 2, they're particularly compared to Latinos and African Americans, they are highly college educated. They are outliers in terms of educational attainment. So again, there's that elitist part there. And then third, they're just far to the left. So if you look at the cultural issues like patriotism, is America the greatest nation on earth? African Americans, 62% say yes. Latinos, 75% say yes. White progressives, 30%. If you look at border security, and this is from 2024. This is like the summer of 2024. So this is not infected by what Trump is doing right now. Latinos and African Americans really split whether 50-50 on whether we should increase border security. Only 15% of white progressives say increase border security. Are we a racist nation? Is racism embedded in this country? White progressives, 75% say yes. That's 13 points more than African Americans, and it's 38% more than Latinos. And then on other issues like religiosity, how often you attend church, the number of progressives who attend church, at least once a week, it's very, very small. So huge cultural disconnects here. Now I want to go to the economic disconnects between college and non-college. And what we're looking at here is we're not looking at polling, we're looking at census data. So this is every person between the ages of 25 and 64 divided by whether you're college educated or non-college educated. So the first thing to note here is there's a lot more of them. There's 109 million of them than us. There's 63 million folks between the ages of 25 and 64. Now I picked that age because those are prime working age. This is essentially working age America. So let's look at salaries. So this is the median household income for college and non-college within that age group. If you're college educated household between the ages of 25 and 64, median household income, $124,000. Inflation is a problem. Non-college, $61,000. Inflation is a crisis. How do you earn your money? Is it salary or is it hourly? By a 3-to-1 margin, it's hourly if you're non-college, which means your schedule really isn't your own. If you get sick, you may not get paid. Taking a vacation is hard. You're less in control of your destiny. And then what is the nature of your work? So 23 million folks who do not have a college education and are in the workforce, 23 million of them, they start their shift either after 7 p.m. or before 7 a.m. So you're not even living in the same time zone as everybody else in your community. Things like childcare, everything else that you need to do, like it's a little bit off. By a 6-to-1 margin compared to college educated, you're in a job where you're doing some sort of physical labor, walking, carrying, moving, toting, standing on your feet. I always say there's 2 types of work where you shower before work and work where you shower after work. They're overwhelmingly in jobs where you shower after work, which means if you have a bum knee, if your back goes out, you're far more likely, 10 times more likely than college-educated folks to be out of the workforce because of some ailment, because of some disability. And then just the last thing, and now we're looking at here, ages 55 to 64, do you have private retirement savings? And if you're college educated, 71% of you, if you're nearing retirement, have retirement savings, and the median's about $280,000. Only 40% if you're non-college educated. So the median's $70,000, which means the rise in the stock market, which means a lot to us if you've got 401ks, it means absolutely nothing, really almost next to nothing for the 109 million people between the ages of 25 and 64 who do not have a college degree. Like, that is just not part of the world at all. I'm going to conclude with what I think are 4 implications for this, and just go through them real quickly. The first is this: white and woke doesn't win. So, white progressives are real outliers on an ideological scale of 1 to 7. This was done by Pew. African Americans and Latinos, so 4 is dead center. African Americans and Latinos are just like a tick either side of dead center. White progressives are really far to the left. On the border, crime, transgender issues, a mostly white progressive base speaks loudest, and they are starting to cause some drift with particularly non-white voters that we didn't see before. Next is Latinos are Long Island Italians. That would make a lot more sense for people up in New York and New England. But what I mean is by this is that Latinos more and more are behaving politically like ethnic whites. And if you look between 2000 and 2023, are these numbers, every single year, even though we've had a lot of influx over the border, every single year, more Latinos are born in the US and fewer are born overseas. More are US citizens and fewer are not US citizens. More speak English as a native language, fewer speak English as a second language. Every single year from 2000 to 2023, those numbers were changing, and it's going to continue to change. And economically, their numbers are, they're starting to resemble more and more, getting closer to white numbers. So the unemployment rate at 4.8%, that's still above the national average, and it's still above the average for whites. But all of these things, like it's getting closer to white numbers. And what that means is Latino appeal must be based on upward mobility and mainstream cultural values, and less on minority status and discrimination, because every single year that trend is moving more and more towards ethnic whites. Third is this. So if you look at what the Democrats talked about and bragged about under Joe Biden, there were a lot of things. We did a lot of things, you know, and they were good things. You know, climate change, infrastructure, a whole bunch of investments. And if you looked at what Democrats were talking about, you know, a lot of it was about the future. And Democrats often say, you know, elections are about the future. Well, they're not always about the future. Sometimes they're about the right now. And if you look at what Republicans were running on, the border, crime, gas prices, et cetera, they were right now concerns. And you need to realize, well, is this a future election or is this a right now election? And because we have lost touch with working class people, if you're college educated and your median income is 124, yeah, the future. If you're non-college educated and the median income is 61,000, it's like, no. It's right now. So we kept telling people what the issue should be most important. Climate, it's an existential crisis. Democracy, it's an existential crisis. They kept telling us what the number one issue was, like gas prices, grocery prices, the border. We have to stop telling people what the most important issue is. We have to start listening to people, asking them, and believing them. And the last is this. We talked about the gap between college and non-college, and there's a gender gap that's also you know, long-standing. Obviously, more women vote Democratic than men do. But there's another gap that's going on here as well that I think combines all of that. And, you know, Harris lost married voters by 13 points. And the marriage gap is now bigger than the gender gap. And something is happening when people get married, that they're saying the Democratic Party is no longer for us. And if you look at how Harris performed with married men and men with children, like it's completely non-competitive there. And she even lost married women. And the lesson here is, we talk about kitchen table economics all the time, how families can balance their budgets and make ends meet. But there's other subjects that are brought up at the kitchen table too, that are family issues, that I think Democrats have been absent on, a lot of these cultural issues, that we have to be part of that kitchen, part of the solution of that kitchen, those kitchen table discussions as well. So there's nothing more that we need to do better in states where folks are highly educated, okay? Winning 18 of 20, that's fantastic, all right? But we are uncompetitive here. And if we don't acknowledge that, okay, and we don't make changes to intentionally connect to folks that are working class, that do not have a college education, this problem is going to be longstanding. So thanks, and you know, we've got time to open it up for questions, comments, concerns, et cetera.
Thank you, Jim. Kate Burns with Metro Labs. So we work with universities who are under their own crisis at the moment, and I couldn't help but notice when you were showing the most educated states on the coast, also where a lot of the universities that are getting attacked are. And at this point, it feels like almost like a bait for Democrats to really focus on and say, we need to preserve these. So my question is in this moment, is there a cultural issue to really hone in on around words like elitism, around these issues that can sort of puncture through the middle of the country for people who are not getting degrees, and to think about our work with universities as something that is not an elitist approach? And I'm not sure if that message resonates, and I don't think Metro Lab can save universities in this moment. I think that they have a lot of reflection to do on their own side, but I'm just curious your thought of the cultural implications of universities in this moment.
Right, and the word you used was bait, and that's a good word. Yeah, I don't think there's a ton of Americans out there that are saying like, oh my God, we've got to save Harvard, you know? And you know, Trump knows what he's doing. And we're actually running something at Third Way called the Signal Campaign, and apologies to Pete Hedgeseth, because I think he's trademarked that. But and it's to separate the noise from what's really relevant to people. The noise doesn't mean it's not important. What Trump is doing to universities is important. What Trump is doing, deporting innocent people to Salvadoran prison, is important. The democracy stuff is important. It's not super relevant to the voters that we need. Maybe insofar as it contributes to a chaos feel, it's relevant. So what we've got to do is, okay, stand up for Harvard, go whatever, Crimson. But really, like, what voters are looking for is, like, I want to be able to earn a good life where I live. Like, that's the number one concern of most people not in like a terrific area like this. And then on cultural issues, like winning the battle of reasonableness on these issues. I'm not saying that there is or is not a magic word, but there's a magic sentiment. Earning a good life where you live, and trying on all of these cultural issues, because they go too far on them too. In polling, Trump is not doing well on DEI stuff, and he's not doing well on trans stuff, because they think he's as extreme as Democrats were, except on the other side. Frankly, they're a little bit more concerned about Democrat extremism on those issues, because it affects them more. But if we are hearing people's concerns on those cultural issues and they feel like they're addressing them, then we can get to the right place there.
Thanks. Rob Werner, former city councilor from Concord, New Hampshire. It strikes me in your presentation around college education and educational attainment, what is it that we can do in terms of providing economic opportunity, not having a four-year degree, like massive investments in apprenticeships and things like that to provide that kind of opportunity for people. You don't have to have a college degree, and you make a very good living. And I think that might help shed our elitist aspect. But are you guys doing work on apprenticeships and economic mobility and opportunity like that? Because I think it's something that we really need to dig into as a party.
Apprenticeships is a great thing. When we've done polling on apprenticeships, it's always polls at the top. That doesn't mean it's a magic issue, because bike lanes also poll high, and there's no such thing as a bike lane voter. But I do think apprenticeships, and compared to other countries, European countries, we have a tiny number of apprenticeships. Like, that's not the way we do it. I think there's a lot of work having to do with community colleges. I think things, I know Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania took about 100,000 Pennsylvania government jobs and said, you no longer need a college degree to apply for these jobs and to get these jobs. So I think we should be looking at credentialing. There's a whole bunch of areas of government reform in which it takes permitting reform, zoning reform, et cetera, where it just takes too long to build projects and we can be employing more people that do not have a college degree in a whole series of construction work. So I do think this is a challenge because as we have become more of a service economy, and you can see what Trump is trying to do with tariffs, is trying to bring those jobs back. I don't think that plan is going to work because of robotics, you know, for no other reason. You know, like it takes 700 people to build what 7,000 people did at the John Deere plant in Moline. So that's part of it too. But this world has moved towards, economically, college-educated folks, and the AI revolution is going to do that more. So, like, these are things that, like, we really have to be thinking about and obsessing about. And I think apprenticeships and some of the other ideas I mentioned, like, that's part of it, but there's got to be more.
Thank you. My name is Dorcia Pleers, I'm the Chief City Auditor in Albany, New York. And if I missed this, please excuse me. But I'm curious as to what role identity politics has played in this conversation. I know we've talked a lot about messaging, but just want to hear your perspective also on the messenger. Because I'm not hearing in some of our national conversation about the fact that Kamala was a Black woman. And if we can't talk about the dynamics of her race and gender and the implications of that in the outcome, I think we will continue to struggle as a party. And then also reflecting on Stacey Abrams' remarks yesterday, when we talk about this idea of being elitist, Republicans, and we look at who's leading the country, but we're struggling with this notion of being the party that focuses more on those who have, when the Republican Party has always talked about cutting safety net programs and giving tax breaks to the most wealthy among us. So I personally am struggling with how we are rebounding as a party and being pushed into these conversations and ideologies when in fact we have been a party and people focused on the working class, focused on saving those safety net programs that help low-income families, and yet we are in defense mode having these conversations that sometimes I don't feel tapped into, and maybe it's because of my own lived experience and my skin. I'm struggling with some of the narrative. Yep,
thanks. And I really enjoyed your presentation yesterday on AI. I thought that was really interesting. I thought Kamala Harris, for the first 8 weeks, ran a spectacular campaign, you know, all the way through the Democratic convention. And you could see, like, we could win this thing, all right? But I also think she was carrying a whole series of, like, anvils behind her, too. Some of which were not of her making. And I think, like, Joe Biden's age was certainly part of that. And my personal feeling is that Biden, the Biden administration did a horrible job at the border. And voters kept saying, the voters kept saying this: my top issue is inflation. My next issue after that is the border. My third issue after that is crime. And my fourth issue is Biden's age. And I think more or less Democrats sloughed away all of those things, okay? On inflation, they said there's nothing we can do. I think that's bullshit, frankly. I thought there was plenty of things they could have done, and they didn't do it, be that as it may. On the border, I think they were derelict. And eventually, they did their executive order, and it essentially shut the border down, but they did it in June 2024. And I can just say personally, like, we gave them everything that they did for that executive order in September of 2023 after begging them to do stuff, and like, it just took them 9 months. And, you know, crime, I think they got a bad rap on crime, but they were afraid to talk about the things that they were doing. And Biden's age, they were ignoring that until it couldn't be ignored. So she had to take all of those things with her as she entered this race. And she was doing a great job. And then she was killed by what she said in 2019. And, you know, it was that trans ad, you know, and she's for they, them, and he's for you. And it's that awkward moment where she's being interviewed, and it wasn't even, you know, it was the questionnaire, it wasn't even from a trans group, it was from the ACLU, okay? And that was shown everywhere. And so, would she have, without those things, would she have won being an African American woman of color, you know, from Berkeley, okay? Maybe, maybe not. You know, those are things that you bring into it, but I think she could have. But she was brought down by things, some not of her making, but also because in 2019, like all the Democrats except Biden moved way to the left and were answering to the groups. And because we were answering to the groups, and we talked to the groups, and we think talking to the groups is talking to people, but that's not the same, we lost touch with them. So you started with identitarian, and I do think there's I do think there's a part for Democrats in which our language is so careful that it doesn't sound like what normal people say in their own conversations. And there's a feeling like, I don't want to say something that offends this person or this group. And really, it's, in a ways, it gets the interest groups riled up. So if I had one piece of advice for Democrats, just one, that it would be, stop talking to the groups, stop answering their questionnaires, tear them up, and talk to people, and not the groups out there. Because I think the groups have lost touch with the people that they represent because they're trying to get clicks, and they're trying to get likes, and they're trying to get money, and we get 100% on all of their surveys, and we're not winning their voters. And I think that's one of the ways that we lost touch. Can an African-American woman become president of the United States? I believe the answer is yes. It's harder, but not if you're carrying, I think you've got to, it's in some ways like you've got to play a little bit against type there. I mean, that was Barack Obama's advantage. Like that was one of his magic was, you know, it's not blue America, it's not red America, it's one America, like he rose above that. So I think it's a different task depending on who you are and you know, and your gender and your race. Is that a fair answer to your question? Okay.
This thing on? Tanya Miller, Georgia House of Representatives. You said that kitchen table issues are not just economic.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit more about what you mean by that? What are these other kitchen table issues that we seem to be losing ground on?
I think they tend to be cultural issues. I think there are things that people are talking about that they're afraid to say publicly because they get they feel like they might get shouted down. I definitely think the trans issue is one of those in which people say like I feel like if I say the wrong word, I say the wrong pronoun, I'm walking on eggshells. And I think people are talking about stuff like that around the table. And I think it's not just paying bills. And Democrats have always had, since I've gotten into politics in the 1980s, it's always been a cultural issue that has reared up its head, and either Democrats have survived it or it took them down. And you know, my first experience was like Willie Horton and crime, 1988. And later it became pornographic art, federal funding for pornographic art through the National Endowment of the Arts. And then it became, you know, gays in the military, and then partial birth abortion, and there's always something that Republicans find that they exploit, where Democrats, it feels like, because we want to protect the most vulnerable, and that is a great impulse that we have, that we're the tip of the spear in all these things, and people at home, I think, at a certain point, they're whispering like, that just feels a little bit outside of where my comfort level. And if I express my concerns here, if I'm not a 100%er, I feel like I'm going to be attacked. So I'm just gonna back up and be out of this conversation here. It's a little bit scary. I think you know what? I think, oh, here's a friend. And I think that definitely happened with trans. And you know, I'm going to say things that are like and look, I have friends who have trans kids. You know, like we have to apologize by saying like, I'm not an awful person because I've got some concerns here. So I would just think about like in your own lives and your family members, like what are they talking about around the table that is not about paying bills? That's like, okay, this is where like the truth is coming out a little bit, and we're not acknowledging it as Democrats. So you know, that's how. Yeah. Oh, we're done? We're done.
All good Democrats. If you're a good Democrat, if you believe in government, you have an obligation to make sure that the government works well for everybody. Make sure that everybody is in. But essentially, we're the get it done party. We're the party that provides safe streets. We're the party that provides good jobs. We're the party that provides an ability for people to build generational wealth, and most importantly, to make sure that everybody is included, because we believe that when we do things together, we can do them bigger, we can do them better, we can do them faster, and of course America can lead the world. We don't have to be an either or nation. We can be a both and nation. We can be a nation of law and order and justice and mercy. We can figure out how to get things done quickly and do that at the same time we're protecting people's clean air, safe water, and making sure that everybody is included in the great opportunities that this world has to offer.
Yes, I will. Let me just
Okay, thank you, Jim, for a great presentation. As always, we transition now from how to navigate the political landscape that was revealed by last year's election to some of the key issues for state and local leaders to navigate the new policy reality under the Trump administration. It's appropriate that we start with a conversation on defending democracy, addressing the specific steps by the president to impact voting access and election administration, as well as the big picture of the challenges around our election system moving forward. For this conversation, please join me in welcoming Arizona Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, Jefferson County, Colorado Clerk and Recorder and candidate for Secretary of State, Amanda Gonzalez, and our moderator, Atlanta lawyer, former Georgia Senator, and New Deal leader, Jen Jordan.
Good morning, how are y'all? Nothing like moderating a panel called Defending Democracy. That's kind of nice and light, isn't it? 8:45. I know a lot of folks in this room since we are in Atlanta, and I'm so glad y'all are here. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Jen Jordan. I'm a former state senator. I was the Democratic nominee for Attorney General in 2022, and probably most significantly for this panel was in the state Senate with Senator Elena Parent at the time that President Trump and Rudy Giuliani came down here and did the hearings. You're very familiar with that road show,
Oh, yeah,
right?
It happened in Arizona, too. Yeah.
All right, right. Why don't you introduce yourself for folks?
My name is Adrian Fontes. I'm the 21st Secretary of State in Arizona, was elected in 2022. And before that, I served for 4 years as the Maricopa County Recorder, which, as you all know, it's the second largest voting jurisdiction in the United States. And I built the system there that was subject to the Cyber Ninja audit. So I know a little bit about, the Cyber Ninjas, the Kraken legal team, one of whom has decided to run against me in my reelection bid next November. So we're going to have some fun. Thank you for having me. And I've been a New Deal guy for, I don't know, a while. I was an alum until I got back into office. So glad to be here, especially with Amanda. Yeah, thank you.
And Amanda, why don't you introduce yourself too?
Yeah, I'm Amanda Gonzalez, and I am the clerk and recorder in Jefferson County, Colorado. So we are just west of Denver. We are a community that is about a third Republican, a third Democrat, and a third unaffiliated. I run elections for about 430,000 voters, and prior to that, I was the executive director of Colorado Common Cause, where I wrote a number of our voting rights laws in Colorado. So wrote the law that created secure automatic voter registration at our DMVs.
So I think one of the significant things, or one of the things that I think that folks are able to really use in terms of disinformation is the fact that all of our voting laws at the state level are different in a lot of ways. And, who actually takes care of the voter rolls, who deals with registration, who runs the elections, there are folks in our state, but they have different names, right? Whether you're the recorder, right? All of those things. So I think it's kind of easy for folks kind of at this level to start kind of nitpicking in terms of disinformation. What do you think the most effective way to deal with some of that is?
Well, the truth is always the best way to do it, but I think one of the things we need to do is to be aggressive about the truth and not allow the narrative to continue to be set by the other side. In other words, when there are folks out there spreading conspiracy theories and lies, what you do is you ask them for evidence and continue to ask them for evidence and continue to focus them on the issue that they first started criticizing you with, regardless of what it is. So we need to have all of our ballots on paper, right? I think it's something north of 96% of American voters vote on paper only. So this is one of those myths. And so what the other side, the election deniers, and those folks will continue to say, well, they'll say, well, we need to have everybody voting on paper. And then you say, well, everybody already does vote on paper. And instead of arguing back, they'll move and they'll shift and they'll keep moving. So what you got to do is you got to bring it back. Tell me why you think people aren't voting on paper. Where did you get that information? And hold them to account. Because in this country, not unlike in the criminal justice system, as in the civil justice system, if you're making an allegation, you have the burden of proof. And we've got to have the guts to shift the burden back onto the accuser. We've got to have the burden to hold them to account for the accusation, the allegation, the conspiracy theory, the mythology, and try to get them to justify or to show any evidence for why they're making these wild and spurious claims, regardless of what they are. That's where we can be really aggressive and still be kind of curious and be pleasant at the same time. It's a very Southern thing that I've experienced. When you say bless your heart, it means something different. We don't use that really too much in Arizona, although a little bit. So that's what I think the best technique is for doing that. And it works relatively well if you can just keep bringing the conversation back to the point where they get frustrated and flustered because they don't have anything behind what they're talking about.
So one of the things that I know when we were dealing with this in the run-up to 2020, we were getting actual advice from the powers that be, whomever that is, right? Not to repeat what some of the allegations were, not to even try to refute it or rebut it, because that in and of itself, serves to metastasize the disinformation, that we ourselves are then part of the misinformation machine. But that clearly was not the way we should have done it.
Well, that's a strategy of avoidance, right? Instead of coming right back and with counterpunching, we would dodge, right? Oh, no, we don't want to give that phrase more space. Yes, we do. We want to say, why is that the way it is? You need to explain it. You're coming with the allegation. You need to explain it. And I'll give you a perfect example. In my one and only debate against my opponent, who's a J6er, when he was running for Secretary of State in 2022, he said on TV he was bringing a binder to his congressional delegation that had chock full of evidence, kind of like Mitt Romney's binder full of women. He had a binder full of evidence that showed why there was fraud in 2020. And so I just kept asking that question: where's the binder? Where's the evidence? You know, and I would make a joke out of it. I feel like I'm back in the 80s in a Wendy's commercial. Where's the beef? And that really struck, particularly when I would use it in Chamber of Commerce, more traditionally Republican audiences, right? When I'd go to Kiwanis clubs and when I'd go, and I would say, look, you all run your businesses based on facts. You run your businesses based on data. Your livelihood is about getting it right. And you're gonna let somebody make this allegation and say that they had an actual physical binder full of evidence and you can't see it? Come on. And that kind of push against directly is really effective instead of sidestepping it and trying to move to something else, because that's actually what they're doing when they try to change the subject.
And so, Amanda, have you done the same thing in terms of when wild allegations have come up or conspiracies?
Yeah. So what we've actually done is we've invited people in. As long as you're not making threats. If you have an honest question about how does this election work or what's going on, we gave more tours of our ballot processing facility in 2024 than any year before. I hate to say it, but we never had, not a single person went through the tour and they saw that everything was on paper. They saw that everything we do is in bipartisan teams. They saw that we had, chain of custody established on every ballot that came in. They'd get to the end of the tour and they're like, all right, looks okay here. But what about Georgia? Right?
Right, what about Georgia?
That's sort of to your point of that it's a constantly moving goalpost. And the reality is we are doing the right thing. We are running safe and secure elections. And their arguments about democracy isn't working isn't actually about democracy working for everybody. It's about manipulating outcomes.
Well, and I think one of the things that we realized in the hearings ad nauseum was that there's a real issue in terms of civics education and just education generally, because people would get up, it would be Joe Blow citizen saying, somebody stole my vote and let me tell you how, and you check the Secretary of State's website and it said that I had an absentee ballot that was cast. And I was like, well, did you vote early in person? Yes. Well, that's all that means. But there was just a real gap in information in terms of people even understanding how their local elections work. But I also think that is true of elected officials as well. I mean, I know it sounds crazy, but a lot of elected officials have no clue even how the voting systems work. And so do y'all do any kind of education with that?
Yes, bless your hearts. No, and it is very difficult, and I think those of us who are directly involved in election administration at a variety of levels, we have our own vocabulary. But then again, as you mentioned at the top, it's different state to state. Georgia, for example, is a very top-down state. The Secretary of State does the RFPs for voting systems and voter registration systems, and then essentially gives it out to the counties and administers it that way. Arizona is exactly the opposite. Our counties will go out independently. We've got several different voting systems in Arizona that all end up reporting to the Secretary of State's office. It's much more local control. It's a strength in America, I think, that Colorado and Georgia and Arizona and everybody else has different systems, because that fights off foreign interference. There's no one way to do things, so there's no one point of vulnerability. It's a weakness because of what you just mentioned. Not even the folks who know campaigns can know elections. Not even the folks who get elected can know elections, because it's pretty complicated. And that's a it's an advantage and a disadvantage in the ways that I've described, and that's one of the challenges I think we always have in this area, particularly when it comes to funding and try to explain things. And even folks in our own party sometimes will use different words for different things. And it's sort of like in the law, there are terms of art. It's a technical space, and you know, I don't know a lot about environmental stuff. I know there's plenty of other folks who do. So I try to go to the experts, I guess is the only way to say that, particularly for this crowd.
I think it's also one of the reasons that we need to make voting as convenient for voters as possible, right? Because it is confusing. You know, it's funny, you know, I have a title of clerk and recorder, which sounds like somebody who makes copies. And I'm running for an office that is called secretary, which also sounds like someone who makes copies, right? But what I'm actually doing is trying to protect democracy for all voters. And so it can be confusing. But that's one of the reasons why we should have mail ballots that automatically go to everyone. It's one of the reasons that we should have long early vote periods so that people can get their questions answered. It's one of the reasons that online voter registration should exist in every state so that if you have questions about how to engage with our democracy, it's easy to get them answered no matter where you are. And I think it's also one of the reasons that we often have voter suppression laws that are thinly disguised as election security, because election security is complicated and only the people over there understand it, right? We need to make it easy for people to understand and engage with the system no matter where they are.
So what do you think, we know kind of what was effective in 2020, right? And even to some extent in 22, but what do you think the biggest kind of areas of disinformation are that you're looking at it and you're like, this is a real problem for us, and we really need to get ready for this?
Well, we thought it was going to be artificial intelligence, generative AI. We did a whole bunch of tabletop exercises across the state. We did a lot of emergency management stuff, emergency communication, how do you distinguish real from fake? And we actually did tabletop exercises, not just with election administrators and all of the folks at our county governments and state government. We did some for law enforcement specifically across the state, and we did one for state and national media. We actually brought folks in from all over the country because we needed the media to understand the vocabulary, the systems, the process. We don't need them learning on the fly, especially when they're so time critical as what we were expecting. Turns out we didn't see a lot of that stuff. We prepared for something that didn't actually happen, and it hasn't happened yet. That's not to say 2026 won't see it. It may. But one of the outcomes from that was very, very positive. Most people don't know this, but in Arizona, and I know there were several in other states, we had 15 different bomb threats on election day at polling places and county offices across Arizona. I know Colorado had a couple. And we only had delays in one polling place for 20 minutes. Why? Because we prepared. We had those lines of communication open. We knew how to deal with issues. Who's going to talk to who if we do this or do we do that? So what we expected to happen wasn't what happened, but because we were so well prepared for it, something else happened, and we could deal with it really well. Yeah. So that was a good thing.
And I do work, so I'm a larger county. I have full-time year-round election staff. I have IT staff. I have cybersecurity staff. I have the folks that can help run the roundtables. That's not true even in every county in Colorado, right? Where if you're in a tiny county, you maybe have 4 staff total. And so I agree that we didn't see the kind of generative AI threats that we thought we would see in 2024. But I think what we did see that is actually a little bit more terrifying is that people don't know what truth is anymore, right? They see an image on social media and they say, oh, that's AI, when actually it's real. And I think the inability to distinguish what is real and what isn't is a real threat, because it really gets in our way of getting out accurate information about elections. You know, we went above and beyond last year, and we continue to do it this year, about going out to community members, We had events in front of schools and laundromats and dispensaries and anywhere that would take us to say, how do we talk to real people to get accurate information out that they can trust? Because we know that they don't know what they can trust on a screen. And I think that's something that we are going to have to continue to contend with.
Well, and what advice can you give? Look, you're lucky right now because I know it won't always stay that way in Arizona, but you've got a Democratic governor, you've got a Democratic AG that you can work with. But what happens when that flips, right? And the governor is a Republican and the AG is a Republican, and then you're the Democratic Secretary of State. What advice can you give for states that are dealing with at the very top of the heap in terms of the authority and the purse strings for funding? What ways can you kind of deal with that? And maybe just to be savvy, if you know that maybe the very people that you should be working with are actually working against you.
I think there's a universal truth that, well, I'll harken back to my days in the Marine Corps, right? The 7 Ps, and they're slightly vulgar, but we're all adults here. Prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. And it doesn't matter what the challenge is, whether or not your co-executives in government are of the same party or not. You've got to be able to look ahead and you've got to be able to plan. What's going to happen? How am I going to deal with it? Who are my allies? Who are the other folks that we need to deal with? And I think one of the things that is incredibly important in these spaces is sort of network of allies that you have that you can call and talk to, whether it's non-government organizations, different folks out there who you can call in to file, I don't know, friendly lawsuits against you that you'd have to defend that would go, these, and I'm not promoting anything unethical here, but what I am saying is it's not always bad to challenge first. It's not always bad to draw first blood. Depending on the circumstances, and it works. It sometimes works really well. I'll give you a great example. When I was the recorder in Maricopa County, we had a significant issue with our documented proof of citizenship stuff, which we've had in Arizona, by the way, for 20 years. Right? Everybody's all up in arms about the SAVE Act. If you want to know how bad it is, ask me later. But we talked to some organizations and we're like, look, these are problems that are happening in your community. Boy, it would be nice if we had some challenges so we could have some finality to clear up this law. And all of a sudden we get sued. And guess what? As the defendant, I'm at the table and I can get a settlement that might help voters. And the courts will be amenable to that sort of thing. You gotta be strategic in the way that you do things, whether you're at an advantage or a disadvantage. The really great thing about having complex systems and complex processes is that if you understand them well enough, you can use them to the advantage of your constituents. You can use them to the advantage of your voters in a whole lot of different ways. So even when you have those disadvantages, you can counter that, but you gotta plan ahead and you gotta have your allies lined up.
Well, we're going to open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions of these awesome folks that know what they're doing?
I don't think you've touched yet on what's going on in DC and the dissolution of CISA, et cetera, and how you expect that to affect state and local elections and the midterms.
Why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to be honest. It's terrifying and horrible, right? That these decisions that are being made in Washington have real consequences. And it is going to be up to the states and the counties to try to rebuild a lot of that infrastructure. And the reality is we cannot do all of it. A lot of what is being torn down is interstate sharing, right? It is comparing notes across state lines that will be harder to do without federal infrastructure. We will rise to the occasion. I have no doubt that, I mentioned that my county has more robust cybersecurity infrastructure than a lot of my neighboring counties. And what we do is we share that information, we share best practices, we do internal trainings. That will continue to happen, and we're going to continue to stretch election workers even thinner than we already are, and that's reality.
So the analogy that I'll give is this. The wall that we had built since, well, for years and years around election administration was protected by sort of the castle, and the drawbridge was CISA. The drawbridge has been opened, and we are wholly and completely vulnerable now to foreign interference in all of our elections across the entire United States of America in ways that most people can't even fathom. And that's real. We're working as hard as we can to counter that. But this is part and parcel, I think, of a pattern, and I've talked about this publicly. If you vote for me, you'll never have to vote again. Now let's make the systems actually less secure, which is what has happened. Now let's issue an executive order that pretends to federalize elections and cast more doubt in areas where there aren't not any issues, right? I still haven't seen any proof that there's millions of ineligible voters voting. It's just not real, right? Now you've got the SAVE Act thing. And the idea is this is part and parcel of a long-term campaign to cast doubt on systems that work very, very well, so that not only do we doubt the systems, but it's okay not to use the systems anymore. And that means we don't need elections. That's what I think the larger strategy is, and I have yet to hear a reasonable argument against that based on the evidence that is already being laid out by the Trump administration. And I'm really worried. I'm really, really worried. And like, this is my job to look at this stuff, and if you're not paying attention to it and you're not fighting back against these guys at every turn, you need to be. And we need to call on our people to call them out in the school boards, in the city councils, in the boards of commissioners. Every meeting, there's call to the public. This needs to be an issue that's important.
Hi, Member Van Orney from Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I just also want to say that we're not all, this isn't as destitute as we think. I did something last year, hope you'll appreciate it. I became a poll worker because I'm the incoming president for the my local League of Women Voters. And so I thought, like, instead of sitting on the sidelines, why don't I go through this just to see what is their training, what's that process like? But all of us can do that. And if you haven't, I really think that you should be doing this, at least for a special election, because there aren't enough people to do this. And so to your point, talking about people being exhausted, right? You've got a bunch of retirees who, respectfully, are not great with technology, and particularly iPads that are very secure, who are trying to figure this out. Now, I was essentially working 3 times faster. You know, for every 100 they did, I did 300 check-ins. But when you do that, you can get people through the process and you can talk about it a lot. So I'm sure you're all doing this. I'd love to hear about what some of your inviting people into the process looks like. But I also think that, like, we all have a hand in too to talk about the process, as well as participating in that and seeing that from the other side of the ballot, to really understand, like, what people are going through, because I'm sure we've all gone to the polls and said, like, well, why am I fiddling around with what papers and what do I need and everything like that here? Well, if you haven't been on the other side, you don't understand, like, how complicated it can be sometimes for people to just to know what do they need to do.
So one of the main, if it's okay, one of the main things that I've started talking about, particularly in the last few months, is the difference between passive citizenship and active citizenship. Because a lot of people are like, well, I want to do something, I need to do something. Okay, become an active citizen. Well, what does that mean? That means something that I've already mentioned. Go to a school board meeting, go to a county board of commissioners meeting, go to a city council meeting, go talk at call to the public. Many of us remember when the Tea Party started doing this. They were very, very organized. And they would challenge on all kinds of irrelevancies and throw all kinds of red meat up on the walls during meetings. And the elected officials started feeling this political pressure to move to the right and move to the right and move to the right. Well, guess what? That was people-powered. Now, was it performative? Was it staged? It doesn't matter. It worked. We've got people out there who need to become active citizens, and we've got a lot of people that need something to do. That's one thing. Working as a poll worker is another thing. You don't necessarily have to work as a poll worker, though. In elections, there's a lot of warehouse jobs, there's a lot of other processing jobs, and there are all kinds of other opportunities out there. So I think the general theme would be, particularly as leaders in our communities, we need to start talking about the difference between being an active citizen and being a passive citizen. A passive citizen just gleans the rewards of a free society. We go to our job, we go to church, we go to Little League, and that's it. An active citizen engages in some of the other civic discourse, civic engagement, and I think that's where we can lead.
And I also think you're exactly right. You know, I often tell people that on the days that I am feeling really bad about the doom scrolling, come into our ballot processing facility. We call them election judges in Colorado, but we hire 900 election judges every year, right? And we do everything in bipartisan teams. And if I told Fox News that I was going to send out a Democrat and a Republican in a car all day to pick up ballots out of drop boxes, they would tell me that I'm going to have a fist fight on my hands. I don't. What I have is people that talk about their grandkids and like go on walks together in the off season. It's really adorable. The other, the other thing that I will tell you is I mentioned that we did all of these community outreach events, and we were recruiting election judges. And the first question I would get is, well, if I do it, am I going to be safe? Right? Because the threats to election administrators and election workers are real. We talked about security, we talked about protections, and people signed up. We actually had 3x the number of judges sign up than what we needed, which tells me that people are prepared and willing and excited to protect their democracy. And I think that that will, for all of the concerns that I have about the deterioration at the federal level, I have faith in our communities, and I'm seeing the everyday citizens that are showing up, and I know that they will continue to do that, but it means that we also need experts at the state and local level to be prepared for anything that's going to come both in 26 and 28.
So I think we have time for one more question. Anybody has one? Oh. All right. Well, thank y'all so much. Really.
Okay, we're going to move to the next panel where we continue on this theme about navigating our new reality. This one's called Federal Funding, Fact versus Fiction, addressing a bunch of issues, including the status of key Biden-era laws, the current state of affairs regarding federal funding in general, how states and localities should adapt to all of that. And we are hosted and moderated by Zach Klein, Columbus City Attorney, longtime New Deal leader. Zach has been focused on how the law can be applied most effectively to promote public safety in Columbus. And just in the last couple of weeks, he announced that the city has filed a federal lawsuit challenging the Trump administration's decision to cut funding for infectious disease programs. I think it was not the first lawsuit and probably not the last. So join me in welcoming attorney Zach Klein to the stage, and he will introduce our next panel.
Well, good morning, y'all. It's great to be with our New Deal friends, and what an excellent conference this has been, and really picking up where we left off from the previous conversation about all the uncertainty emanating out of Washington. And we have a great panel here to talk about federal funding, what federal funding means, and I think this hits home to a lot of folks in this room. If you're an elected official at the city, the county, or the state level, you want to know what in the world is going on with federal funding, because there's no guarantee that it's coming, and then all of a sudden you try to navigate what strings are attached to the federal funding in order for your city, your county, or your state to receive it. And we have an excellent panel here to talk about various aspects of federal funding, what's currently in existence, what hurdles are there, and what can we do about it in order to be successful. So I'm gonna introduce them, but allow them to maybe talk a little bit about their organization, and then give each speaker an opportunity to speak from their perspective, and I'll ask questions along the way as things pop up, if that's okay. But this is a really important and timely conversation. And the first person is Jillian Blanchard. So Jillian, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting this amazing summit. It's been really inspiring. Very grateful to be here. I'm Jillian Blanchard. I'm with Lawyers for Good Government. I'm the vice president of our Climate Change and Environmental Justice program. Lawyers for Good Government very quickly was born on the eve of the 2016 election and has grown, when we all realized lawyers needed to help protect the rule of law, right? It has grown to a nationwide network of 125,000 legal advocates, and for the past 3 years, we've been helping to disperse this historic federal funding. So we are very invested in helping to protect it, and we're currently working with about 700 federal grantees. So I'm excited to share with you what you can do and what the actual facts are rather than fiction.
Caitlin?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My name is Caitlin Durkovich. Up until about 3 months ago, I served as the Deputy Homeland Security Advisor for Resilience and Response in the Biden White House at the National Security Council. I have about 30 years of experience in critical infrastructure protection and Homeland Security matters. I spent 8 years in the Department of Homeland Security during the Obama administration in what was the predecessor to the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what the dismantling of the Homeland Security apparatus means for you and your communities, and how you can think about bridging that gap and building resilience within your communities. But for my time in the White House, I spent the bulk of it helping to demonstrate at the President's direction that the federal government did work on behalf of the American public, and I think that that is one of the messages that you need to continue to drive home to your constituents, is that government does work. It is here for you. We're not walking away from it. The Trump administration is, and then begin to explain what you are doing.
Mayor?
Thanks. Good morning. I'm Andy Burke. I was one of the first New Deal leaders back in the day. I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Helen Milby, to Debbie, and to the entire New Deal crew. I was a state senator at the time. Then I became the mayor of Chattanooga, Tennessee. Drove down early this morning. Flew home last night. I'm going to spend the week at home, and am happy to be by my hometown. We were the first city to do universal fiber to the home back a while back. Then we were the first city to do free 300 symmetrical broadband for every family with a child on free or reduced lunch. We had all kinds of great progress in Chattanooga. Was able to use that experience to go to the Biden administration, become the special representative for broadband, helped set up the broadband equity access and deployment money, as well as the digital equity money, about $48 billion there. Then became the head of the Rural Utility Service, where we dispersed about $4.5 billion worth of new high-speed internet connections. And because of the Inflation Reduction Act, did about $40 billion worth of new clean energy in rural America.
So there's two conversations that are shaping up here. The first is about grant funding and the type of money that is possibly available, not available, the ever-moving target. And the second is about this dismantling of government and that real-world effect of how you get money out the door, how do you get visas processed, how do you get Section 8 vouchers processed when you see government cuts from Washington. And I want to start with Jillian because, being a lawyer and the services that you provide, as the Columbus City Attorney, we have engaged in several lawsuits against DOJ, Trump, and the administration over our grant funding. We have a U.S. Forestry's grant that was turned off because we were planting trees in an area of Columbus that has 30% less trees than the rest. Well, it also happens to be a black neighborhood, so they cut it because that's DEI. So we have a lawsuit with that. We have a lawsuit over infectious disease funding, where we have a measles outbreak, maybe in your community. We're seeing it in Columbus. They're trying to eliminate funding for us to do the contact tracing is the word I'm looking for. The contact tracing for measles, they cut that funding for us to be able to do the infectious disease research. But we make that possible because of partnerships we have with nonprofit legal groups, because these litigations can be expensive when you need to have outside counsel and discovery. So what does your organization play? How can folks here who may be interested in litigation, concerned about grant funding, and the role that your organization can play as you see kind of the grants being turned on and off?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. Great question. I mentioned how we got started, and one of the things that I started doing with the Climate Change and Environmental Justice Program was, in Trump 1.0, how do we work with state and local leaders to make progress in the absence of federal leadership and push a green and just economy? And so through that, we've been doing a lot of work on this historic federal funding, whether it's through direct services, helping craft policy at local and state level. And in this moment, right, we've already been working with so many grantees. I think we worked with like 700 local and state and community grantees before the election, right? So we were poised to help them. We, like you, are extremely invested in this historic federal funding, right? $2.2 trillion. So we're kind of built for you in this moment, to assist you in this moment, and to assist the grantees. And I want to say I love the title of today's the session, because it's fact versus fiction. The reason I think people like lawyers in this moment, it's so rare, we get to have this one moment of popularity, is because in this moment it is so important to cut out the noise. There is a flooding the zone approach of chaos and overwhelm, particularly in the grant world, to scare you into submission, to keep you overwhelmed, and to make you think you just can't get that funding, let's go somewhere else. I'm here to tell you that's fiction. The fact is, there are things, it is a struggle. The fact is that there are about 220 executive orders that have been put out since January 20th. About 35 of them are related to the grant funding and have impacted the grant funding. Executive orders are not law. They are directive to federal agencies to operate within the existing law to try and effectuate new policy. That existing law includes the Inflation Reduction Act and the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Those are laws, and until Congress changes them, they exist. And they are congressionally mandating this funding. I tell you that because I want you to feel this confidence that we're trying to instill in grantees, that you are on the right side of the law, which is why your lawsuit, thank you for filing it, is probably winning. And since January 20th, I just checked this, May 2nd, there have been 135 successful lawsuits against these executive orders. We are winning, right? We are winning on the law. It takes time. The wheels of justice, they do move slowly, but we are winning on the law. So what I want you to know is how to engage with those lawsuits. I also want you to know the resources that we have available. The other thing that is not being challenged right now that you can know about and have ways to fund your infrastructure and your clean energy projects is tax credits. They are written into law. Elective pay is in the Inflation Reduction Act, and it was made available to cities, to states, to nonprofits, to religious institutions, and we at L4GG have free resources for you to use to learn how to file for those tax credits. Get that funding for your 2024 projects, your 2025 projects, and the skinny budget talks about even phasing some of that out, but it doesn't talk about repealing it because it has bipartisan support. So come to us for assistance with those tax credits, help your community learn about them. The third fact that I want to make sure folks know is that there are resources to help. L4GG is available to you, that's our affectionate name for Lawyers for Good Government, available to you as cities and grantees and state grantees, and also to help draft your policies, but also for your community folks. There are resources, hopefully they'll be on the screen at the end, like a QR code of how to get legal assistance right now. We have a fund protection clinic. We're offering one-on-one pro bono assistance for all USDA, Department of Energy, EPA grantees, anyone who needs legal assistance right now to know what the lawsuits that are ongoing are that protect you, and to get pre-litigation support, because it's really important for you all to stay in compliance while these lawsuits play out. We also can connect you up, like Zach was, to different big greens who are bringing those lawsuits. We're partnering with them. We can offer you the pre-litigation support, we call it, your administrative record, make sure you stay in compliance, learn the rules, and then connect you to those litigators so that you can have more permanent relief. And the last thing, if I might, I just want to share some things because Leader Abrams was so inspiring yesterday about the things that you all can do in addition to learning about these resources and sharing them with your community. You can trust your experts. Don't trust the overwhelm. Don't trust the fear that's being instilled. Trust your experts. Ask them. If they're threatening taking away my 501c3 status, is that real? I can tell you it's not. They can't do that with an executive order. The IRS can individually start a process. It takes months, et cetera, et cetera. We have a guidance brief about it because our goal is to give you those facts. If you can, please don't panic. Your community is looking to you. You can be the leader right now and explain to them these are resources. We're winning on the law. There's a lawsuit right now that can help you unfreeze your funding. It's out right now. There's a preliminary injunction that we can help you with. Come see me after if you want details. Identify those resources. And then the last plea for all of you is, in order to be that leader, I think Leader Abrams just blew me away with how she said it yesterday. So I'm going to try and capture some of the things she was talking about, is to hold on to those values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Preemptive compliance does not work. I've seen many grantees say, well, I'm just going to take this off my website. I'm just going to remove the words environmental justice. And I can tell you two things. One, it doesn't work. That grantee immediately will get terminated or frozen. And two, your community is watching. They see you take their, for the very first time, as we were just hearing, they started to trust government. They started to say, oh, I'm going to get money from this federal government. Maybe I can trust them. And then it's taken away. And now they're looking to you to say, can I still trust you, government at my local and state level? And you can make it really clear that's a resounding yes.
That's some great stuff, and I want to come back to, if we have time, about the nuts and bolts of getting leaders connected with resources to engage in litigation if necessary. I want to talk about the dismantling of government and how screwed are we? I mean, it's just national security. Like, just give us the lowdown.
I'll start on a positive note in that we are a resilient nation and we are resilient communities and we can be innovative, and our communities certainly rise to the occasion when called to. And we've seen that across the country when you look at the range of domestic incidents that we've dealt with, frankly, since the Department of Homeland Security was established, and long before that. I mean, our history is of resilient communities and a resilient nation. I've spent the better part of my career in the Homeland Security space, and my time in government has either been at the Department of Homeland Security or at the National Security Council, focused on domestic preparedness and domestic resilience. One of the reasons that Congress undertook the largest reorganization of the federal government in the early 2000s was to enhance the security of our homeland, given kind of the growing complexity of the risk environment. We had 9/11 in 2001. And there was efficiency in bringing together 22 departments, different departments and agencies, to create this thing called the Department of Homeland Security. It was initially focused on countering terrorism, but over the course of the last 23 years, that mission has broadened into not just counterterrorism, but cybersecurity, domestic preparedness and emergency management. You think about the flow of trade. It is really an incredible set of missions that are the Department of Homeland Security. And unfortunately, the border and immigration component of it has perhaps prevented it from progressing as far as we would like. And that's one of the reasons that it is kind of the target of the Trump administration. But it is a department that does a lot of good for your communities. And as we say, the Department of Homeland Security has the largest retail presence across the United States. When you think of what it is the Transportation Security Agency when you go through airports. It's the United States Coast Guard that is responsible for marine safety and rescue. It is the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency that is in your communities, helping your state and local governments with cybersecurity, helping to protect critical infrastructure protection. It is the Federal Emergency Management Agency that is on the scene before and during when disasters strike. I can go down it's the Secret Service that does more than just the protection of the president. It really is an amazing amalgamation of different missions, and has been responsible for helping our communities prepare and then respond when disaster strikes. The Trump administration is, I would say, dismantling the Department of Homeland Security, and it is programs that affect your communities. You are seeing a reduction in force in the cyber Security and Infrastructure Security Agency in a number of different programs. So There's all sorts of free programs that CISA provides to do assessments of critical infrastructure, to do assessments of houses of worship and public spaces, to provide recommendations for to enhance the security. They do a lot with state and local governments around cybersecurity. We just had a panel on election security. They were the agency that was responsible really for helping to work directly with state and local governments and state and local officials on protecting our elections. When you look at what's happening with FEMA, the both reduction in the grant programs to build the resilience left of boom, but again, the changing nature of that mission. And one of the reasons that Jimmy Carter, we're here in Atlanta, created the Federal Emergency Management Agency back in 1979 was because he understood there were going to be times when disaster struck and the capacity of state and local governments would be overwhelmed, and they were going to need to look to the federal government for help in rebuilding the communities. One of the things that the Trump administration is considering as they dismantle FEMA is ending their involvement in the long-term recovery process. And frankly, that is the most difficult and the most costly part of recovering from a disaster, is rebuilding your communities. And the federal government brings not just the spending power of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but it brings USDA, it brings Commerce, it brings the Department of Energy, all different departments and agencies that contribute to not only helping rebuild a community, but build it back stronger and build it back more resilient. I can kind of go down the list of, you said 200 different executive orders? How many? 220. 220. Executive orders, all of the programs. There is an executive order that the president signed in March that is called Achieving Efficiency Through State and Local Preparedness. And there's kind of two through lines to it. One is that it calls for moving away from all hazard preparedness and a focus on risk-based preparedness. And I'm not gonna get into an argument about past policy and future policy, but that's frankly always been how we've approached preparedness and critical infrastructure protection, is thinking about it from a risk-based approach. What's unique to your communities? What are the risks you need to think about in terms of natural hazards, in terms of other potential threats? But it also basically says that state and local governments and critical infrastructure are better positioned to understand their risk, to deal with the risk. It's more efficient for them to do it. And we as a federal government think that we don't have as big of a role as we used to, and we're going to put that burden back onto state and local governments. There's a reason that there are national programs, because there is efficiency in having a national critical infrastructure program. There's efficiency in having national ambulance contracts when disaster strikes. I can kind of go down the list of things, but basically what the Trump administration is saying is that we are going to transfer the risk, and you as state and local governments are going to have to take on this mission, take on this risk. And it's a challenge when you live in a balanced budget environment. It's a challenge when you are also seeing public health programs dismantled. Let's go down the list of other services that the government provides that are outside of Homeland Security, where you're going to have to think about how do we, as state and local governments, begin to address this gap. And so a few things that I would say to you. One is that really learn how your emergency management and your Homeland Security apparatus works in your state. Understand the compacts that you have with other states. There's something called the Emergency Management Assistance Compact, EMAC. That means when you as a community, you as a state are overwhelmed, you can turn to a neighboring state and say, I need help, I need National Guard, I need firefighters, I need ambulances. They have served our communities well, but this is an opportunity, I think, for states to come together and again, understand what the regional environment looks like and how they can strengthen how they're going to work together. I would also tell you that it is important to start having this conversation with your constituents. Hurricane season is coming up, summer, it's kind of summer hazard season, and this is an opportunity to build resilience left of boom, and that's not just thinking about how you enhance the resilience and the security of your critical infrastructure so that when disaster strikes, you're less likely to lose power. There's all this money that's available through bill, through IRA that can be invested in your water systems and other infrastructure, but it's really important that you start to think ahead of disaster, and it's not a matter of if, but when, about where those investments are going to have the most impact and most likely to ensure that your infrastructure and your communities can withstand an event. I will end where I began in saying that I think the message that needs to be delivered here is that you as leaders are not walking away from the security and resilience of your communities. It is something the Trump administration is doing, but we are communities, you are resilient, and it is time to come together and identify, again, what are the challenges and the risks of your community and think creatively, both from within the community as individuals, but with neighboring states, how you can begin to fill some of those gaps.
So I'm going to come back to you, but I wanted the question I'm going to come back to you on so you can think about the answer, is this idea that in Jillian's world, we have the ability through litigation to recoup funds. Like this is congressionally authorized money. There's constitutional limitations on what the executive branch can do. They just can't not follow Congress's laws that are passed or divvy the money out. It's called impoundment. It's in the Constitution. There's a little thing called the Constitution that prohibits the president, try as he might, to prohibit the money. But in the restructuring of government and the dismantling of government, is litigation even a possibility? What is the recourse? So think about that, because we have the ability to sue to get money, but if you're just restructuring government and passing the buck down to the cities and states, and the examples like FEMA that you mentioned, like what is the recourse, or do we just take it on the chin and have to prepare for it? All right, so Andy, I want to specifically talk about broadband because I think that is fascinating. And maybe to the group, what is the status of the broadband deployment? Maybe is there still money available? Is the Trump administration taking that away? And then I have a footnote part of that because I like many people in this room, we talked about like why government doesn't work and abundance, and broadband is part of that. Of like, can Democrats get out of our own way to actually deploy broadband? So I just have to ask you since we're on the stage about that. So take it away.
Okay, let me start by saying the Trump administration is making life worse for people in America today. Period. Right? And let's use broadband as a huge example. I'm going to give you two ways that they're doing this. Number one is they are stopping people in America from getting high-speed broadband today. Okay, so when President Biden left office and a bunch of the people who are in this room stopped working for the federal government, there were 3 states ready to start building out broadband. There were 16 states in the pipeline that just needed the approvals to start, and then everybody else was somewhere in that. All that has stopped. Why did they do this? They have stopped people from getting high-speed internet so that the richest man in the world can make a few extra $1 billion, okay? That is where we are with this administration. So there's a list at everybody's state broadband office of all the different addresses in your, literally addresses block by block of who is supposed to get high-speed internet. Unless something is about to happen that I don't expect, they're going to change and back this stuff up so that it takes a year, 2 years, I don't know how much longer to get this money deployed, and also so that more of it will go to Starlink, owned by this guy who immigrated to our country and did pretty well with the system that we had. You may have heard of him.
And he got a loan from DOE.
And he got a loan from DOE on this stuff. So, if you are looking and thinking about what this is, understand that one of the things that people care about the most, particularly in rural America, and I traveled extensively over these last few years, is the ability to get a piano lesson online, or get a recipe, or work from home, or submit your homework, or whatever it might be. And this administration is stopping that so that Starlink can get some more money out of that $42.5 billion. Period, end of story. Second thing, I joined New Deal Leaders back when it started because I was one of the people who was running around talking about efficiency in government. I believe more than I think just about anybody in the efficiency of government. To call what is happening now government efficiency is blasphemy. Chaos does not create efficiency, it creates inefficiency. And so when you fire people who are essential to getting this funding out the door, you make a more inefficient system that causes it to get out the door slower and to ensure that people don't get the benefits of this for much longer, if at all. And so you have this situation, and this applies in the clean energy context as well, where there are people at the Bureau of Land Management or at the Forest Service or wherever it might be, whose approvals have to be done so that these transmission lines or these fiber lines can get built, and there's nobody there to do it. And that's because nobody thought to ask the question, do we need these people? Are they helpful for efficiency? Which is chaos, not efficiency. And so for these reasons, we should be talking about the ways that the Trump administration is making life worse for Americans today. Now, as we talk, I'm happy to have a conversation. I know Robert Williams is here. We work together in the broadband world about what we could do. I'll tell you this, anytime people tell you the Biden administration didn't build anything, we got out billions of dollars in bipartisan infrastructure law funding for the Reconnect program, and those are being built today. All right? And so do not let people say none of this happened. Were there things that we could talk about that could be done better? Of course. But I think the point of this is that today there are people who would have internet if the Trump administration wasn't stopping it.
But it goes back to the dismantling of government, right? You're firing employees and under this idea of efficiency, reorganizing government, pushing it to the localities to take care of the major problems that are of national origin and national concern. Typically will not be associated with any money coming to the cities or states to help you do that. So you have to figure it out on your own. So outside of litigation, what can the leaders do in this space? Is it advocating? Is it talking about it? What resources or strategies or solutions do you have for folks that are invested in their own communities at the state, local level to push back on this reorganization and dismantling of government? Either of you.
So that's a great question because it is, I think, if I was in your situation, very overwhelming given the number of things that are being dismantled. And I wholeheartedly agree with what Andy said. And the brain drain that has happened across the federal government in addition to just the slow roll. And you look at disaster declarations. When we were in the Biden administration, we processed 270 major disaster declarations, 104 in our final year, which is what flowed federal aid into these communities. The last time I checked the disaster deck portal, I think 4 major disaster declarations had been approved. And there was a story in the Washington Post even about the governor from Arkansas, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, and her frustration about the lack of approval for a disaster deck related to tornadoes. And that's just not how we operated, because often we knew that the communities that were most impacted, sorry, I'm like a hand-wavy person, this is part of my problem, were the most vulnerable. And so our goal was to turn those things pretty quickly. you know, I don't, right now, this executive order that I talked about, achieving efficiency through state and local preparedness, and it's the exact opposite, actually. And I am going to disagree with you, Andy, on something, but they're calling for a review of all of these policies. So why all of these policies are being reviewed, they're just slow rolling everything.
Yeah.
I think in the instance of Homeland Security, because we really are very vulnerable right now, and we are so far less prepared than we were when we walked out the door on January 20th. When you look at all of the things that have been dismantled, the most like whole of the earth, just superstar federal career employees are leaving. People who were going to try and stick it out, who know the regs, who know how to be innovative and to speed aid. They're just, they can't be part of it anymore. It's heartbreaking. It's totally heartbreaking. And so, I mean, when I took civics, when I was young, there were 3 branches of government, and they were all separate but equal. And I think right now it is incumbent for Congress to understand the impact that this dismantling is going to have on the constituents and the citizens that they work with, because they're the ones who authorized all of this. This is still law. This is what I don't get. Right? And when I was at the Department of Homeland Security and there was oversight over me, and we tried to do any reorganization, it was impossible because it used to be what committee you were on and the programs that were under you was like, that was your power in Congress. And I'm like, we are having a constitutional crisis right now, and it has to end. And Congress has to step up and push back and be a separate but equal branch of government, because it is going to impact their constituents. They are accountable to their constituents, and I think...
Can I give a +1 on that for what you all can do in this moment for Congress? Is you can help educate them. I literally just did a press conference with Senator Markey yesterday, and he's amazing. But it was amazing to me. He's one of the most vocal on this federal funding issue, and even he didn't have the latest and greatest facts. So what you can do is you're so much closer to your community. Learn what's going on in your community. Who's suffering because they can't reach their project officer? Who isn't getting, like, who benefited from a tax credit? What projects are now on hold, whether it's resilience, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's broadband, because they cannot reach their agency? Because you're right, Caitlin, it is a law. It does exist. You cannot just restructure FEMA in the executive branch. These are things that the members need to be told that you care about, because they need to be reminded. And so I think if you're willing to take homework to find out what projects are going on in your, could be going on, or have gone on, or cannot go on now, and sharing that with your member of Congress.
Give us the last word, then we're going to take some questions. Okay.
So,
1 minute. One question. Okay.
So a lot of politics is about setting the terms of the debate. And President Trump is very good at doing that. So we have to take control of the terms of the debate. And what we can do is tell people exactly what's going on. Chaos does not create efficiency, it creates inefficiency. Going in your state and finding out those addresses where people are supposed to be getting high-speed internet today and are not, and letting them know in your constituency, this is so Elon Musk can get more money, that is setting a different term of debate.
Okay, one question. One question, okay.
This is a big issue for me. There we go. Resilience is a big issue in Norfolk. We have a lot of flooding, and the whole community. What is your thought about the BRIC grants? Maybe I'm getting into minutia here, but can they be summarily just rejected because they happen to be, like was mentioned in Columbus, they're serving communities that are underserved, and that's a DEI issue. How do we? Is that a lawsuit waiting to happen?
It's underway, actually.
Awesome.
It is, and I would just like double down on letting Congress know how important BRIC is in your community. Right, building resilience.
Resilient infrastructure in communities. Yeah.
So I'll take the last word as the moderator and just really encourage everyone in this room, if you're interested in being part of litigation, Columbus is leading the way. We're happy to have co-plaintiffs. We have partners that do not-for-profit work. It shouldn't cost your municipality anything. You can join along with us in the fight on all these important programs because this is real money that affects real people every day in our communities, and we have this chance, if we're talking about fighting back, to actually do something, to bring litigation, to call it out, to talk about the harm that's happening, and that we do have a coalition of the willing of cities, of states, of counties, blue state AGs that are pushing back and doing all this work that is vitally important so that government works and we can show that it works.
Zach, can I add just one other thing before the applause starts? One of the remits I had at the National Security Council was around disinformation. And we can get into the censorship state and First Amendment activity. I will tell you, we have to change our playbook for how we flood the zone with the facts. And I think Andy's given you great messaging. I've talked a little bit about how we need to talk about that the Trump administration is walking away from the preparedness and the resilience and the security of our communities. But I think this is one thing that the New Deal leaders can take on, right, is start to develop that messaging about what is happening, about what is required, and we just have to flood the zone. I will tell you that after Hurricane Helene, we totally turned how we thought about messaging around and pre-deploying what we wanted to get out there. Let's not fight what's disinformation, misinformation. Let's flood the zone with the message that we want, and we have to do it every day, and we have to condition our constituents to what is happening, what could happen, and what we are doing, and what the Trump administration is walking away from.
All right, thanks everybody.
I forgot.
Sessions. They will run from 10:10 to 11:10. For those that are attending our breakout session on education, that will be in this room. So if you're going to the education breakout, please come to the front of the room. We'll have our co-leaders sitting up here. If you are not attending a breakout session, we ask that you please clear out of this room so that this room can be quiet.